They snapped the cuffs tight, close enough for him to smell the agent's confidence, and Bumpy Johnson didn't flinch, because when power is rushed, someone always forgets who actually owns the room. The sidewalk didn't change when it happened. Same cracked concrete, same slow Harlem afternoon. Only the sound of metal told anyone this moment was supposed to matter. The agent stepped in too close, close enough to make it personal, close enough to whisper without witnesses. His voice carried the kind of confidence that comes from believing a badge is permanent. Turn around. Bumpy Johnson didn't ask why. He didn't argue. He didn't lift his chin in defiance. He turned slowly, deliberately, not the movement of a man cornered, but of a man allowing someone else to make a mistake. The cuffs snapped shut. Tight. Too tight. That was intentional. The agent leaned in, expecting something angry. Panic. A threat. That's what men like him waited for. A reason to escalate. A story to tell later. Bumpy gave him nothing. No tension in his shoulders. No change in his breathing. Just eyes forward, calm, almost distant, as if this wasn't the main event. People stopped walking. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough to notice. Harlem had seen arrests before. It had seen violence. But this felt different. This wasn't law. This was a theater. The agent spoke again, louder now, for the street. Words about federal authority, about consequences, about how today was different. Bumpy listened the way men listen, when they already know the ending. He didn't look at the agent. He looked past him toward the block, toward the storefronts that had survived harder days, toward faces that didn't flinch, didn't scatter, didn't beg. That was the part the agent didn't understand. Power isn't proven by how loudly you announce it. It's proven by who stays calm when you do. The cuffs were meant to shrink him, to turn a symbol into a suspect, to make Harlem watch one of its own get handled. But the silence worked against the agent. Every second Bumpy stood there, without reaction, stripped meaning from the gesture, turned spectacle into impatience, turned authority into insecurity. The agent adjusted his grip. Another mistake. Bumpy finally spoke quietly, measured, almost courteous. You finished. Not a challenge, not sarcasm. A question asked by someone already thinking ahead. The agent stiffened. He'd expected fear. Or fury. What he got was composure, and composure is dangerous when you don't own it. As they walked, the cuffs clicking softly with each step, Bumpy didn't lower his head, didn't rush, didn't resist. He walked like a man borrowing a moment. He planned to return with interest. Harlem watched him go. Not with shock, with memory, because the street knew something the agent didn't. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the moment someone confused motion for control, and that confusion was going to cost more than a pair of cuffs. The car disappeared down the block, but Harlem didn't move on. It never does, not when something important has just been mishandled. Doors stayed half open. Radio stayed low. Eyes followed the empty space where Bumpy Johnson had stood. Nobody asked questions out loud. They didn't need to. Harlem knew the difference between an arrest and an insult. An arrest has paperwork behind it. An insult has an audience. Word moved without urgency, without panic. It passed through barbershops in clipped sentences, across dice games that paused mid-roll, through back rooms where men spoke softly and remembered everything. They put cuffs on Bumpy, someone said, not shocked, not angry, just precise. Another voice answered, older, steadier. Then somebody's feeling brave this week. No one laughed, because courage that announces itself usually needs witnesses, and witnesses make things complicated later. This wasn't fear spreading. It was a calculation. People replayed the moment the way chess players replay a move that looks aggressive but leaves a king exposed. The tight cuffs, the agent's volume, the way Bumpy didn't look back. That part mattered. A man truly caught off guard reacts. A man being tested observes. Shopkeepers wiped counters slower than usual. Numbers runners skipped routes they didn't need. A few phones rang, then stopped ringing. Not to organize, not to threaten, just to inform. Respect in Harlem wasn't loud. It was structural. It lived in favors remembered, debts forgiven. Lines never crossed. Bumpy had built that quietly, over years, by knowing when not to act, by settling things before they needed settling, by keeping the neighborhood intact when pressure came from every direction. So when the cuffs went on, it didn't feel like law stepping in. It felt like someone stepping out of line. And Harlem is patient, but it never forgets who ignores its rules. Men who didn't owe Bumpy anything still felt it, because when authority humiliates one man publicly, it's rehearsing for the rest. The agent thought he'd isolated his target. What he'd actually done was remind the block why it trusted Bumpy more than any badge. No protests, no shouting, just a quiet recalibration. By nightfall, the story had sharpened, details trimmed, meaning clarified. This wasn't about guilt. It was about restraint, and restraint in Harlem was always rewarded. Eventually, somewhere behind concrete walls, Bumpy sat alone with the echo of metal still on his wrists. He didn't send messages, didn't ask for help. He waited, because he knew something the agent didn't. When you mistake calm for weakness, the entire room starts leaning away from you. And Harlem had already decided which side of the room it was on. The room was smaller than the street had been. No windows, no audience. That's where men usually feel powerful. The agent liked that part. The door closed. The noise stayed outside. This was where outcomes were supposed to bend. He set his file down harder than necessary. Paper made a sound it didn't need to make. Bumpy Johnson sat opposite him, hands resting easy, posture unchanged. The cuffs were gone now, but the agent still talked like they were on. He spoke in lists, charges, statutes, years, numbers designed to compress a man's future into something manageable. Bumpy listened without interruption, not polite, not submissive, just attentive. The agent leaned forward, voice lowering. He wanted intimacy. He wanted dominance to feel earned. "You've been protected," he said. "Long time." "That ends today." Bumpy nodded once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Protection was an interesting word. It assumed dependency. The agent misread that nod and kept going. "We talked about cooperation, about names, about how quickly respect evaporates when you're on the wrong side of the door." This was pressure. The kind that works on men who rush, men who need to prove something, men who confuse noise for leverage. Bumpy didn't rush. He studied the agent instead. The way his hand hovered near the file like a shield, the faint impatience behind his confidence. This wasn't control. It was hunger. "You don't say much," the agent finally said. Bumpy met his eyes for the first time since sitting down. "Steady. Unimpressed. You talk enough for both of us, da." No heat, no challenge, just truth stated at a normal volume. The agent stiffened. Silence settled back into the room, heavier now. Pressure works best when the other man believes time is against him. But Bumpy had lived long enough to know time doesn't rush the patient. Every minute the agent pushed, without substance, weakened his position. Every threat that didn't land became a record someone else would read later. Bumpy understood systems. He respected them when they respected themselves. This one didn't. The agent made a call, then another. Doors opened, closed again. Each interruption diluted the performance. Each delay shifted the balance. By the time the agent returned, his confidence had thinned, not gone, just exposed. Bumpy leaned back slightly. "Am I being charged?" he asked. "Or are you thinking out loud?" The question wasn't hostile. It was administrative. The agent stared. He hadn't prepared for calm resistance, only defiance, because defiance justifies force. Calm invites scrutiny, and scrutiny is expensive. Somewhere above them, paperwork moved. Hands reviewed decisions made too fast. Voices less interested in theater started asking for clarity. The agent felt it slipping. This was supposed to be his moment. Instead, it was turning into documentation. Bumpy said nothing more. He didn't need to. Pressure only works when one man wants relief more than the other. And in that room, with the door closed and the air still, it was clear who could wait longer. The courtroom didn't announce the shift. It never does. It happened in the quiet, between questions, between glances, where authority decides whether it's going to perform or listen. Bumpy Johnson stood when told, sat when told. No flourish, no resistance. He wore the moment the way he wore everything else, like it wasn't permanent. The agent sat straighter than he needed to, uniform crisp, notes organized, a man bracing for validation. This was the stage he trusted. Judges respected the procedure. Paper mattered here. Confidence usually passed for truth. The agent spoke first, clear, efficient. He framed the arrest as necessary, the cuffs as protocol, the urgency as responsibility. He talked about risk, about influence, about the need to act before things got complicated. Bumpy listened, not with boredom, with precision. The judge didn't interrupt. That part unsettled the agent. Judges usually interrupted when they agreed, or when they wanted to steer the narrative. Silence meant evaluation. When it was Bumpy's turn, his attorney rose, said little. That mattered more. No grand defense, no emotional appeal, just questions placed carefully, like weight on a scale. Why were the cuffs applied publicly? Why the charge hadn't been formalized? Why urgency hadn't translated into clarity? Each question opened space. No doubt, space. The agent answered quickly at first, then slower. He started explaining. Explaining is where authority leaks. The judge leaned back, time stretched. Courtrooms are built on routine, but power shifts in pauses. In the seconds when someone decides whether to keep listening, the judge asked one question, simple, neutral. Where is the warrant? The agent answered, but not cleanly. Too many words, too much justification. The courtroom felt it. Not a shock, recognition. Bumpy stood there, hands folded, expression unchanged. He didn't look at the judge, didn't look at the agent. He looked forward, like a man who already knew silence would finish the work. The judge nodded slowly. Once, that was enough. Procedures were cited, concerns noted, language softened, but the direction was clear. The agent's case wasn't collapsing. It was thinning, and thin cases don't hold weight for long. When the judge spoke again, the room sharpened. Release, pending review, insufficient grounds for now, no drama, no rebuke, just restraint exercised by someone who understood its value. The gavel came down lightly. The agent exhaled too late. Relief didn't come with it, because the courtroom hadn't rewarded him. It had exposed him. Bumpy turned to leave when told. Same pace, same posture. Nothing about him said victory. That was the point. Outside the courtroom, consequences were already arranging themselves, quietly, efficiently, without emotion. The pause was over, and the weight of it was about to land somewhere else. The cuffs came off without ceremony, no apology, no explanation. Just procedure reversing itself as calmly as it had been applied. Bumpy Johnson rolled his wrists once, not to soothe them, but to feel the return of balance. Metal had a way of reminding you what people thought they controlled. He didn't smile, didn't thank anyone, didn't look back at the agent. Men who understand power don't celebrate its return. They note who tried to take it. The agent stood frozen for a moment, papers still in his hand, eyes searching for a reaction that never came. He'd imagined this part differently. There was supposed to be something, anger, triumph, bitterness, something to justify the risk he'd taken. Bumpy gave him nothing. He walked out at the same pace he'd walked in, measured, unhurried. Outside, Harlem was waiting, but not in the way movies show it. No crowd, no cheers, just a few familiar faces, positioned like punctuation marks along the block. Men who didn't approach, women who didn't ask questions. They didn't need answers. Bumpy nodded once to a shop owner sweeping a clean sidewalk that hadn't needed cleaning. Another nod to a man pretending to fix a window that wasn't broken. Acknowledgement passed. Respect reaffirmed. No celebration meant something else had survived intact. Inside the building, the agent felt the floor shift. Calls that once connected instantly now paused. Eyes that had nodded earlier now waited longer before doing so again. His superiors weren't angry. They were colder than that. They asked about optics, about justification, about why the arrest had moved faster than the paperwork. The agent explained. Again, each explanation shortened the leash. Because institutions forgive mistakes when they're quiet. They punish them when they're public. And this had been very public. By the end of the week, the badge came up for review. Language like overreach and procedural concern entered his file, not accusations, warnings, the kind that doesn't go away. Bumpy didn't hear about it immediately. He didn't need to. He returned to routine like nothing had happened, checked in where he was expected, spoke less than usual. Harlem watched that too. This wasn't a weakness. It was message control. Violence would have turned the agent into a victim. Noise would have turned him into a martyr. Silence turned him into a footnote. And footnotes don't carry badges for long. By the time the news reached the street, quietly, indirectly, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a correction. Bumpy had been taken, tested, and released. The system blinked first. That mattered more than any apology ever could. Harlem didn't mark the moment with headlines. It never trusted paper to remember things correctly. What it remembered was tone, the way Bumpy Johnson came back without telling the story first, the way he didn't need to correct anyone, the way life resumed, not loudly, but intact. That mattered. Power that survives humiliation without demanding repayment becomes something else entirely. It stops being personal. It becomes structural. People noticed how nothing followed the arrest. No retaliation, no sudden disappearances, no warnings delivered in dark corners, just continuity. Children still walked past the same stoops. Shopkeepers still closed at the same hour. Men still argued softly over cards, and numbers like the world hadn't tried to intrude, because Bumpy understood something institutions often forget. The community doesn't ask for dominance. It asks for protection from chaos. And chaos had been avoided. The agent's badge disappearing didn't echo loudly. It didn't need to. In Harlem, consequence doesn't arrive like thunder. It settles like dust. Slow, unavoidable, permanent. People spoke about it indirectly, in comparisons, in lessons passed quietly to younger men who thought force was faster than patience. Remember, someone would say, who stayed standing without raising his voice. That became the story. Not the cuffs, not the courtroom, the restraint. Bumpy never addressed it publicly, never corrected rumors, never claimed a victory he didn't need. That's how legacy forms, not through declarations, but through repeated proof. He had shown that respect could outlast humiliation, that silence could dismantle arrogance, that authority borrowed from a badge collapses faster than authority earned from people. Harlem remembered that. Long after the agent's name stopped being spoken, long after paperwork changed hands, long after the moment itself blurred, what remained was the lesson that real power doesn't rush, doesn't announce itself, doesn't need witnesses. It waits. And when it moves, it doesn't leave scars. It leaves order.